Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is a very belated monthly wrap up for August of 2022. So, at the end of every month, I do like to try and summarize the things that I read for that month. It's kind of a little bit more for me than it is even for anybody watching. It's just kind of a way that I like to keep a record. So even though they might come very late, like this one happens to be coming, because we're already towards the end of September, it's something that I still like to do and that I still think, at least for me, is worth doing. So if anybody's watching this and they also find it worth it, great. I'm going to talk about the books that I read in August. So a lot of them have to do with Star Trek. I am sort of, I guess you could say, captaining a booktube event for the second year running, and that is Book Trek 2022, where myself and some others read and celebrate Star Trek fiction. The month of August was Wrath of Book Trek, where we basically read fiction from iterations of Star Trek that we looked at last year. So it's a revisit. It's a way to revisit a lot of our old favorites. So for that, I read a few things. And I did also listen to a couple audiobooks, so I'm not counting that inside my wrap up. I'm just talking about physical books that I read for this. One of the first things was this graphic novel collection, Star Trek Next Generation Mirror Universe collection by Scott and David Tipton with some artists. And actually, the artwork is all pretty solid. Some of it is a little more traditional comic book, and some of it was, you can see this style, a little bit more painterly, I guess you could say. I'm not sure exactly what to call that. But I really like this. We never saw the Mirror Universe in Star Trek The Next Generation, so they had a lot of free reign for creativity with this. The very first third or so takes place in the Mirror Universe, and we see the Mirror Universe counterparts getting together and how they become a crew of the Enterprise. And then the next 2/3, we go back to our crew in the Prime Universe, and we see them starting to encounter these Mirror Universe counterparts, and those end up being some pretty solid. Every episode is like a solid Trek episode with a subplot of the Mirror Universe running through it. Usually infiltration. One of the crew is a Mirror Universe person; they don't even realize it. It's solid Trek, just in graphic novel form. And I enjoyed this. I like this overall, and it made me buy another graphic novel from these two brothers that I read for September, which I'll make a video about later on. So I like this. If you like graphic novels and you like Star Trek, I would recommend checking this out. I also I read two original series novels that deal with what are called, it's called the Riansu series. I'm not sure if I'm entirely saying that right, but essentially it's an early exploration in the fiction of Romulan culture. So first we had My Enemy, My Ally by Duane, and then we had The Romulan Way by Duane and Peter Morwood, who I believe ended up, I don't know if they were married at that point or if they got married after, but they did end up becoming husband and wife. Now, overall, between these two, I did like the first one a little bit more. We have this character here, who is essentially, she's sort of defecting in a certain way. She's not becoming pro-Federation, but she does not like the path that the Romulan Empire has taken. Sorry, still got a little bit of a cough from COVID that I just have to do sometimes. And she has essentially broken protocol, gone over the neutral zone, and basically engaged Captain Kirk to help her to stop what she considers a terribly unethical plot that the Romulan Empire is plotting. Something that, this is a culture that we are shown is obsessed with honor, and she finds it very dishonorable. So they go through. So we have Romulan crew and the crew of the Enterprise getting together and teaming up. And the action in this was very good. Some aspects of Romulan culture I thought really worked well. Other ones, it just wasn't alien enough. Some of it has certainly been adopted by the series writers and become canon. Some of it has not, but it was an interesting exploration. My only thing was that I thought that the two crews ended up getting along way too well, too quick. But otherwise, really fun action in this one. And then that's followed up to here. This is sort of an aftermath, an epilogue in a way to the first one. And this one instead deals with a spy. She is a human spying for the Federation, pretending to be essentially like a Romulan house servant slash slave. And inside that household, we end up getting as a prisoner McCoy, who it turns out is on his own sort of spy mission that's related to whatever she's doing. And his stuff, the stuff related to him finding her and what she's doing, I thought was a little bit too ludicrous. I liked her story at first, definitely, but where they take her and her decisions didn't quite make sense to me. Especially, I mentioned this in the video that I made about it, but she's supposed to be conflicted about whether or not she wants to stay on Romulus or go back to Earth, and this book shows us no reason for why she would ever want to stay on Romulus, although we're supposed to think that she's conflicted about that. So anyway, that's one part of this, but what's also going on inside the book is switches back and forth between that story and a history lesson on Romulus, on like why they separated from Vulcans and how they got to their planet and the first kind of conflicts with humanity. And that stuff was okay. It was hit or miss. Some of the stuff was, pretty kind of cool historical, historical lessons. I'm not sure what we want to call it here. Some of it was a little bit dry and not entirely convincing. So this was kind of a hit or miss book for me. I overall really enjoyed this one. This one was okay. Some parts I really liked. It was all well written. It's just I wasn't convinced by many points in this in the plot. But overall, glad I read these. The last Star Trek book that I had read for the month was this one, Relics, a novelization of the Next Generation episode by Michael Jan Friedman. And I really like this. This was a very swift read, very fast. And it's a novelization of one of my favorite Next Gen episodes, where we see Scotty from the original series basically, he meets the crew of the Enterprise D. He had saved himself for over 70 years inside a pattern buffer in a transporter after his ship crashed on a Dyson sphere, which is a very cool sci-fi concept unto itself. And he is essentially trying to find his way in the future now, in a place where he kind of wants to be included. He wants to be understood. And, these the individuals that he meets don't always understand exactly who he is, what he has to offer. This is very much about the world moving on, about one's time passing, realizing that you're the relic at this point. But it's done so, I think, with a lot of grace and dignity inside the story. And Friedman adds a few little tidbits in here that I think really enrich the story quite a bit. So I would highly recommend this one. I read another thing for Book Trek, although it was not Star Trek. I had a kind of a side / away bonus mission in Book Trek, and that was to read some nonfiction science. So in August, I read The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far, Why Are We Here by Lawrence Krauss, which is kind of a weird title, honestly, especially the Why Are We Here? The book doesn't address that at all. So I'm not sure, that could just be the publisher putting something on there and not him. Really what this is, it's a history of particle physics, history of the field of particle physics, the people who were involved, the discoveries that they made, little tidbits about their biography, and Krauss attempting to show why what they found out or discovered was so profound, so extraordinary. And I think he's got a difficult task ahead of him, because we're talking about particle physics and quantum physics and all this stuff. And for somebody who doesn't know the science, like me, who can't do the math, it is very difficult to convey to people what you're talking about. And I commend him for trying. Some of this stuff I was able to figure out. I mean, he does give little diagrams in here, but there's definitely times when, my eyes are glazing over, and I still don't quite understand. Even if I get it, I don't quite understand why it's so profound or important, just because I'm not understanding the math, I think, behind it. So that might be just kind of a fault of my own. But it doesn't at all talk about why we are here. That's not what it's about. So this book was kind of, it was okay. That's what I say. It's okay. I've read other books by Krauss that I actually think I enjoyed more. So, I definitely learned some things, especially about some important physicists, people who don't, have their names, excuse me, sorry for the cough, have their names sung about all too often. But overall, I was a little bit let down, I have to say. And that also goes for the next book. So I have been reading, along with some other great people, every month we've been reading Gothic fiction. We're reading mostly in chronological order. So we finished the 18th century. We're now into the 19th century. And this is, I think, what was our second book for the 19th century. And this is, we read the first one here. It was Zastrozzi by Percy Bysshe Shelley. When he was a teenager, he wrote 2 Gothic novellas, really. And I was excited to read this, especially because, Shelley obviously has an amazing command of language, or at least he definitely would by the time he was an adult. And also, personal bits about him, especially his worldview, I find fascinating. The fact that he was an atheist. He got kicked out of Oxford for publishing a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism. And I had read that his atheism kind of bled into this story of Zastrozzi. And I was really interested to see where that went. And the story started off really strong. We have a guy getting abducted, basically, and he's thrown into a cave and basically like tortured and neglected. And then he escapes and he's on the run. And it's like it throws you in the middle of the story. There's like no buildup. It's just you're there. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be like a cool cat and mouse game or whatever it is. But then it doesn't end up being that. We end up having a long stretch. Most of the novel is just this woman trying to get this guy to fall in love with her. And it drags on for a long time, and it stops being very exciting. And then the last couple chapters, we get a little more excitement, a little more violence. But then, by the time that stuff with the atheism comes in, Zastrozzi, the character there, like he kind of gets on these atheist rants that don't really make sense. They're not consistent, and I was kind of surprised to find that Shelley, who himself was an atheist, would go and try and make a villain out of atheism. And have this villain justifying his terrible acts through atheist means. It's just, I've read the pamphlet from Shelley, and that's not really at all what it's about. It's actually a fairly well-reasoned pamphlet that he ended up writing about atheism. So it doesn't feel at all in line with whatever he has Zastrozzi saying. So anyway, I was kind of disappointed with this. Impressive for a teenager. The fact that he was a teenager and wrote that, yes, that is definitely impressive. But as a work of entertainment, it's very derivative of what came before and not terribly interesting. So that's my reading month. I can't say that it was the most exciting reading month, honestly. I had some good ones and some good things and some duds. I'm trying to pick up these books, but they're trying to slip out of my hand. So I had read for Book Trek, kind of going the opposite order here, but Relics, The Romulan Way, My Enemy, My Ally, and The Mirror Universe. I read Zastrozzi as Gothic, and also as part of Book Trek, I read The Greatest Story Ever Told. So that's my month of August, coming at you in late September. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, thank you, BookTube.